Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Hey, this is Tyler Jones, and you're listening to the Element Podcast. Oh, Christmas tree, how lovely are your branches. What's happening, all my woods people?
Is that how it goes?
That's how it goes, I think. Isn't it?
I don't know.
Oh, maybe I don't know either.
I don't know that song. I know the beginning, yeah. But
Yeah.
anyways.
Okay, so this is all about trees. We're going to talk about trees. Just me and KC talking about the trees. And does picking the right tree really matter? I guess it depends.
Are you
right?
asking me, or are you just...
I'm kind of asking you.
Are you tabling the question?
Should we table it? We probably should.
Yeah.
I think this is it's a rhetorical question. It's up to your discretion at the end of this podcast, maybe.
Yeah. So maybe even press pause and ponder for 5 seconds right now. Does it matter?
Does it matter? One thing that does matter is we have a few more Onyx Premium memberships to give away on this episode.
Oh, my goodness.
But it's going to happen at the end, so you got to listen all the way through. That's what we're doing. It's like we're kind of parenting you right now. We're pulling the whole, because I said so. So for the bow hunter especially, I think it could be, for us, in our opinion, as bow hunters, it's pretty imperative. And I think on hanging hunts in new areas, which we do a lot of, picking the right tree can kind of make or break the hunt for you.
So that's interesting right there. Does it matter hanging hunt or season-long stand location?
It matters, I think.
It matters either way.
To me, but this, like I said, you get to decide. But in my opinion, I think it could matter either way. The hanging hunt thing is difficult, especially in the mornings.
Yeah.
Like in the dark of early morning, it can be very difficult.
And you got to pick the tree each time.
Right.
That's the difference. That you're doing it a lot.
And so, you also, if you're going into a new area on a hanging hunt like that you've never seen before, this could be very, there might not be a perfect tree. There's probably not going to be a perfect tree.
Highly likely.
There's not going to be perfect trees out there. My dad sits in one up in Kansas, I think. But the last time you and I hunted together, we spent probably over an hour trying to pick the correct tree on an afternoon hunt. And I feel like we did a really great job. Mm-hmm. We had a buck work perfectly down the right trail that we wanted to come on. And how many yards did he end up at?
9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stepped
it off.
Slightly quartering towards. But, Texas buck.
Yeah. I'd have taken a shot. I'm shooting a 470 grain arrow at 280 feet per second.
280?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I was talking to, we have a game warden that goes to our church.
Yeah.
And I was talking to him the other night, and we were talking about setups. And I was like, yeah, my buddy, he's shooting nearly 500 grains. And I was like, I can't remember. It was 260, 270. But apparently it's 280.
Yeah, 280. I think actually next season I might go up in arrow weight a touch, which is a topic for another podcast.
It definitely is. So on that afternoon hunt that we did it right. I kind of had this idea to go through and go through our process of picking a tree, how we do it, what we look at, and we're by no means experts. As you have probably seen if you followed us, we have, or if you you followed us because you've given up hope on us. No, if you follow us, you know that we have not actually shot a buck this year. We've been on some really close calls, and we did shoot a doe earlier this year.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly. That was the quickest hunt I've ever been on.
Very, very simple task there.
So, we're not experts, but these are just like anecdotal, personal experiences that we have that hopefully you can get a few tips on what to do, what not to do, just based off of, what we've experienced this year.
And it's something that we do right often is pick the right tree. And it's like you said, we're not experts at this, but it's something that we have gotten right quite a few times, and we've gotten wrong enough times to examine why we got it wrong too. So it's worth talking about.
Sure, yeah.
And it's something that is probably overlooked by a lot of people because everybody just wants to get in the hunt. But getting the hunt started right is one of the most important things.
I don't know. You're pretty happy-go-lucky, so maybe you don't quite feel this, but I know when I'm with you on that. I totally mentally I understand that getting the right tree is more important probably than setting up 20 minutes before that. You know what I mean? But and I don't know. I'm kind of asking you, but I know personally, when we're on the ground and it's 3:15 p.m. and we're sitting here what tree? I'm kind of we're about to get walked in on right here, blow everything out,
I'm always just we'll just shoot them from the ground if they come in.
Yeah. So I don't know. I get a little bit anxious, but I definitely don't think that hinders my ability to know how important picking the tree is and to just do it, however long it takes to find that tree. As a side note, if you're gun hunting, this process could be a touch easier.
Could be.
Because there's a likelihood that you have a little more range. You know what I mean? So you could set up a little more in an open area, possibly.
Which is still a part of it, though.
Right. No, there's still it's still a big issue, picking the right tree.
You got to find the spot that actually is going to make it advantageous to hunt with a gun. Otherwise, you might as well hunt with a bow if all your shots are 30 yards.
Right. Hey, let me say this real quick, just for documenting purposes. We have been talking a lot about gun hunting lately. And we've talked about the 30-30 open sight quite a bit. That's something I want to do pretty bad.
Yeah.
And so I just want to document that, in the future, maybe next year, but I'm going to maybe try a hunt with a 30-30 open sight so that when somebody does that before I get a chance to do it, they know, all these people know that they copied us, right?
Okay.
So that was my idea first. I just want to be
good. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So there it is. Anyway, let's lay out the process of picking a tree from our perspective. I think first, for me, we're trying to make assumptions on where the deer are at the time that we set up our stands and where their destination either later that morning or that night will be. I mean, what are your thoughts on a big scale right there?
Well, I think selecting the area is way more important than selecting the tree. Well, maybe not way, but you get what I'm saying. It's very important to choose the right area. You don't want to look at a place and be like, man, look at that oak tree on that map right there. That's a really good spot.
Yeah.
You want to look at a map and say, hey, this is how the deer are going to use this area. They're going to, use this terrain or use this water feature or whatever, and there's a pinch here or there's a funnel there, which are pretty much the same thing, or what have you, and then look at the surrounding properties, if there's agriculture, if there's bedding to the north, south, east, west, whatever, and determine what specific area you want to go to, and then you can get in there and actually worry about selecting a tree. But
so you're doing that on aerial maps, basically.
That's me. You know how I like to do things. I love to look at aerial maps, and then sometimes in some areas, specifically, when we went up and did our little Rut-Cation, it was pretty important to actually look at the topographic features too. Maybe not so much here in Texas. Some places, yes.
Yeah,
but, a lot of times here we're looking much more at water features and how the timber and open country relate to each other, and then maybe kind of determining through those the direction to travel that the deer are going to have morning and evening. And then maybe also if you've been in there and done a little trail camera work, you can tell that as well and relate that to the same thing. And then kind of decide at least where you want to go in. And If I was going to narrow it down, I'd probably narrow it down to like an acre. Try to at least get that narrow, maybe 5 acres on the map, and then go in, and then you're actually looking for a tree. Can you relate to that? Is that something that you
I feel like that. I think the C in your middle name stands for cartologist.
Maybe.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like that with your map skills, we tend to be in a pretty small spot by the time we get in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, based off of your aerial map, you're like, okay. Like the other day, you were like, I'd like to have a 1/4 acre spot picked out before we go in there to know that that's the spot. And like, obviously, if you don't spend as much time on maps, or if you're new to it or whatever, like, it may be a bigger section for you. But like, I feel like you do a good job. I mean, like, I don't spend as much time on maps, but I can understand what you're saying and have knowledge about the deer and what deer do sometimes, and or the history I might have with deer and on that property, and I can help make the assumption as well. But like, between the two of us, we end up being in a pretty small spot a lot of times, knowing it's going to be one of these. I mean, it's going to be in this very small area right here. So I think that's what we're kind of seeing, and you definitely want to. I think like you take that big map, and like you said, you understand travel routes and stuff like that. Basically, the whitetail is kind of ruled by its stomach, right? So like, you understand their travel, how they travel from food in the morning and to food in the evening. In most cases,
understanding what those food sources are, and understanding that it's not always a corn feeder or a food plot that the deer are headed to,
or a cornfield.
Yeah, cornfield. Yeah, a lot of times it's not man-made stuff at all, especially when you're hunting public land.
Yeah,
you're talking about oak groves, American beautyberry, honeysuckle, whatever it is, and oftentimes there's not really a bed to feed as much, so you really have to consider what other things are influencing direction of travel, whether that's hunting pressure, and the more
water,
abstract things,
creek system, whatever.
Yeah, creek system, whatever it may be. Maybe a deer might have to browse around all day where you're at to get enough sustenance to last, to feed it. So it might be more about, what's their general travel, their meandering, what are they going to do?
We kind of experienced the whole food source thing you're talking about on that last hunt. Actually, we went in. We did a good job in the morning, I felt like, as well. But we didn't really know. We knew that there was probably like a direction of travel on this property, because it's kind of a long, skinny property. And so we ended up not really knowing what the food source was after the morning hunt, and like why they're moving this direction. But we saw all the deer moving this direction. So we actually... we might could have hunted that wind in there, but it wasn't going to be just ideal. So we decided to pull our stands, and we went on a drive. And honestly, like, you can't see a whole lot of the property from roads, but you can see surrounding property. And we were able to glass some stuff up, and we were finding that on these field edges, you may see, like, a lot of times in East Texas, we have a ton of coastal Bermuda. We've talked about it a bunch, cattle pastures, and you think, KC and I tend to think, oh, it's just junk, like, doesn't have anything in it. But this time of year, on what we noticed, at least the other day, was that there was like ryegrass growing up, cool season grass growing
especially
up.
In the marginal stuff, like
on the edges in the shade and that kind of thing. So anyway, that was like, we discovered that as being a food source. That helped us to hang that afternoon and assume what the deer would be doing.
Yeah, and after you look at all of that stuff, like direction of travel and just general area stuff, you have to really consider access to the area you're trying to find the tree.
Yeah, no kidding.
And something that I don't think people talk about enough is that morning access and evening access are completely two different things. Because in the morning, you're much more worried about, like, physically bumping into deer and getting winded, which is kind of for both times, but especially the like physically bumping deer and spooking deer by your sight and sound, or by your sound rather. Okay. In the evening, you're much more worried about staying concealed and not being winded. Okay, because it's daylight and deer can see you. Oftentimes from their bedding locations, because that's how they set up. They're not stupid, right? So in the morning, say for instance the other day when we went on that public land hunt, we walked right through the middle of an open pasture. Very little moon. I think it might have even been a touch overcast. It's real dark outside, and the best place to be was up on that highland pasture, and then go in and enter the woods and do the least amount of tracking through the woods that we could. Okay, and I'll juxtapose that to the evening. We tried to stay as much as we could in the fingers of timber in areas that we didn't really expect deer to be bedding, which we may have bumped deer, you never know, but you can't go walking out across the open pasture in the evening. So the way you get to your stand, the way you access your stand, you really have to consider that, or I'm sorry, your tree, because you don't have a stand in it yet. You have to consider that for going in and selecting those locations as well. Like you might have a place that just looks unreal from the map, okay? But you really can't get there without risk of bumping some deer. I would prefer to go down and hunt the place that's pretty good. You might have the deer starting to spread out. They might not be quite as pinched, but you can get in there a lot cleaner. I think that matters a whole lot more. I'd rather have a decent chance at all the deer than a good chance at the deer that you didn't bump, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like, like you're saying, as far as to continue on the sight thing, like if you're going in downwind of bedding, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm good. But it's afternoon hunt. Well, the deer are going to be able to. I mean, they're going to be looking in your direction. Whether they can see you or not is a different story. But so like if you're going where they can't see you, you're going to be upwind of them, and if you're going where they can't smell you, you're going to be within line of sight possibly. So you do have to be careful about that. Big long routes are kind of the case sometimes. I mean, I don't know how long we walked in the other afternoon when we did that, but it was a long ways, and we didn't know for sure that we weren't going to hunt a certain area that we decided not to hunt before we went to a different area. So anyway, I guess, so once you make all these assumptions, once you get ready to access and you've got your game plan on how you're going to access without being seen or smelled or heard, then the next kind of step, we're usually trying to find like a narrow window of travel along that route of the deer's travel.
So we have gotten to our spot now, right?
Yeah. Well, we are making an assumption still on this is the direction to travel, this is where they'll be bedded, or this is where they'll be feeding. So, and this is our access. Now, and you're kind of all this is coming together at the same time maybe, but like you're finding that funnel or pinch, whatever you want to call it, that you talk about. So like I want to be where the deer have to walk within shooting range of me. So like you're finding that funnel to hunt along that travel route that they have from, feed to bed or vice versa. And you want the largest amount of deer that morning or evening to come within bow range of you, right? So that's kind of like the next point, I feel like, or the next thing that we're thinking about. And then after, like, once you narrow it down to that, you travel in, like you were saying, now we're on the way in. You got to find the tree now that allows deer to come within bow range but not be downwind of you.
I think that's a huge part of it, right? Like, so as soon as we start like looking at individual trees, like we're looking at this one, and this one, right? We are constantly thinking about what is the wind doing from that specific tree. And what's funny is that from tree to tree, it could actually be doing different things, especially if you're in like that broken timber country where you got some open area and some things that are really timbered up. Like, just because you got a northwest wind doesn't mean you have a northwest wind.
Right. Draws, creeks, ponds.
Anything might pull it down. You really need to think about, especially if you have a wind that's less than 6 miles an hour, and that's like the steady. It's funny because you can have gusts to 13, 14 or whatever, and then it gets still, and it's still going to affect you thermally. So if you have a wind that's like ever less than around 6, we found, you really have to consider like what cold bodies of water or draws or elevation is going to do for your thermals in the morning and the evening, and how the cooling or the warming of the earth is going to affect what your wind is going to do. It might even be where like you've got say you have a 6 mile an hour wind out of the northwest, okay? Well, as the sun starts to rise, okay, it's going to heat the earth. It's also going to leave cooler pockets in the lower parts that might draw your your air down that direction. So you might have a steady northwest according to the weather station, but where you're sitting, you might have a northeast because of those pockets. And that might change as the sun rises or sets too.
Yeah.
So you have to consider all that.
We were kind of in an issue that afternoon, the last afternoon we hunted together, where we had probably 110 degrees of downwind, possible winding of deer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We 110 degrees is basically we expected a deer probably not to show up from that direction. Maybe more like 90, whatever. But we were in that situation where we had I think a northwest. At times, at other times it was very light and variable. Maybe in north. And then we were sitting in a little draw. That's just a little low spot that was headed east and west. And the larger draw was down to our west. Therefore, you would expect that in the evening that your thermals might be moving down into that larger draw as the earth is cooling, right? And so we're sitting here thinking, well, our wind's going to be moving to the west down this thing when it's not blowing. And then when it gets up to that, actual 7 mile an hour gust or whatever it is, 10 mile an hour, then it might be blowing to the east a touch, So we had that issue. And we basically just said, well, I didn't know for sure. I thought deer might come from behind us a little bit, but you had a pretty good feeling that deer were going to come from this, 180 degrees or whatever, that to the north or whatever, right? So, that's what happened right at dark,
Yeah, and who knows what we did win and never see. Because one of the things you really run into in timber country is unless you know without a shadow of a doubt that there's a specific bedding area over here and a specific food source over here and no other deer are going anywhere, you're going to sacrifice some deer. It's just a part of life, and it's not something that's talked about a lot on TV shows and stuff like that. Oftentimes because people like to be absolutists, right? They like to say this is what's happening. Yeah, and sometimes you just don't know everything that's going on in the woods, especially if you're doing a hanging hunt. But something that we found a lot and that you might have to just weigh out your options on is what direction are you going to sacrifice deer coming from? And that day we decided to sacrifice deer that would be moving through an open area if they did it.
Right.
And they were on the other side of a hardcore barrier of briars. And don't underestimate that, because just because there's nothing topographical that's a barrier doesn't mean there's not one there, because the briars, especially in East Texas, can get real thick, and the deer, if they do move through it, it's only through one trail, and you were sitting on that trail.
Exactly. Yeah. I was shooting to that trail, you were shooting to the other one, and we had actually walked down that way a little bit, trying to find the spot where the deer might be coming on the other side of the briars, and it was just so thick for so long. We were like, okay, we've got that section covered. Let's just go ahead and let the wind blow to that briar patch right there, So at that point, we have gotten to this area. We understand that there are a few trees that we're looking at that could possibly work. Now it's pretty much elimination time, right?
Yeah, it's exactly.
Let's go through that process a little bit.
So, the wind direction thing's the big deal, and that's kind of the first thing you can eliminate. We've kind of covered that. But then you have to really think about, actually shooting deer, right? You have to think about, if you shoot a deer, is it going to possibly run onto another property and you not be able to access it to retrieve your deer, which is kind of not something that happens real often, but it's something you do have to think about from time to time. One of the bigger things that you have to think about is, are you going to be able to see these deer that you're trying to shoot? And then if you can see them, are you actually going to have shots at these deer? And that's one of the things that we stand there and deliberate the most, I think, is okay, that's a good-looking tree. I think we can see some deer, but are there actual shooting lanes from there? Because we don't get to go in and cut these very often, right? So you're looking at, can I hang there? Or in our case, can two people hang there and have shots at a couple different directions? And you have to...
You got to shoot holes in everything.
Yeah.
In other words, I know it's kind of punny or whatever, but you have to... That's the good thing about hunting together.
Yeah.
Is that the things that I can't see or you can't see, one of us is going to be like, well, you're an idiot, or whatever.
Every time we strategize, like, I'm always trying to prove you wrong.
Right.
And it's not because I want you to be wrong. I want you to be right. But I'm trying to find the way that this is wrong.
Yeah.
That way we cover it.
Exactly.
And as
you
long
have
as
to,
we
you have to go,
accept
why
that
is
of each
this a
other.
bad tree? Every time you have to say, okay, here's the tree that I like looking at that's open and big and, I can hide in. But why is it a bad tree? Every time you have to do that, I feel
And
like.
I think something that I struggle with a lot is I like to be able to see a lot. I like to see a long ways. And I think it really does help you often. But there's been many times, and there's a specific time that I've talked about quite a few instances on the podcast where I was hunting a very large deer on Texas public land, and I hung in a observation sit all year long because I didn't want to go in. And I remember sitting there with my binos, like, how can I set up in a different spot? And I would be looking at these trees with my binos from my tree that I knew that I could set up on this deer, but I'd be like, I can only hang like 9 feet up in that tree, and it's not very brushy, and I just don't have the cover. And it's like, dude, if you just go do that, you'd shoot the deer, and it wouldn't matter if it was very much cover,
perfect,
because he
whatever.
doesn't know you're there.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I really struggle with a lot is like wanting to see so much that I actually put myself off of the deer.
Right.
It's almost like I have a rifle hunter's mentality from a bow stand.
Yeah,
I don't
think it's from hunting with you necessarily. I think it's more from like this year we've called more than probably I ever have.
Yeah.
I kind of said, I want to be aggressive this year because we got a lot of different spots with a lot of decent bucks on it. I just want to shoot one. I'm going to get aggressive and make it happen as opposed to sitting there all year and doing the observation thing kind of, so like I've kind of been in that mode of like, I need to see as well. And I haven't necessarily been that way all my life, but, because I wanted to be able to see a deer, 300 yards away and call to it and make it come to me. Right. Well, that's kind of come back to bite me a little bit. And I don't know, like in November, that's not a bad plan.
Yeah.
Right. Especially earlier in November in a lot of places that have normal ruts, to go in, be able to see, rattle or grunt to deer that are moving out further from you.
Yeah.
Not a bad plan at all. Here we are. It's December. That's not the same plan we should have probably, So
No.
I think like for me in my kind of my story in relation to this is the one with kickers. If you've been listening, you might have heard us talk about kickers. This is a buck that you and I were actually split up, and it was the first morning we hunted in Kansas on this last trip. So late November, deer are still doing their thing. They're just not like middle of the day raging, or whatever. But definitely more of like a cruising mentality than like a running full speed after does that don't want them, So like we had set up the night before, and I set up in a tree that I could see in on the edge of this field. I wanted to see what was going on with you. We could film each other, that kind of thing. Like we had some benefits to being able to sit on the edge of this field and look at each other from a few hundred yards away and that kind of thing. So anyway, I had set up there, had a north wind. I'm on the north side of this, section of woods that kind of runs east and west. And I'm thinking, that a deer is going to come down this north side right here and because that's kind of the best place for him to walk. But the next morning, I had my stand there, and we had set up in early November within about 15 yards of there, but we were back in the woods just a touch. And it was a great tree. But anyway, we found those sheds like out on the edge of this thing and everything, and I just thought, man, they probably travel down this thing a lot. Well, I just should have known better because on a north wind, I talked about it, but on a north wind, that deer, I had a deer come basically behind me, downwind of me, right? If I'd have been sitting in the other tree and not able to see as much, I still would have seen him coming in, more than likely. And because he was coming from a different direction, but still a pretty open area, I would have seen him coming. I would have shot him at 10 yards probably. And instead, I was sitting where I could see, and I was 25 yards from him through the brush. And that's the thing is like you said, you have to be. You don't need to be where you can see necessarily. You need to be where the deer are going to end up 20 yards from you on the upwind side, right? That's the whole point of this thing.
And honestly, something I don't do a lot, and you're better at than I am, is like try to get real close. I'm confident in my longer range shooting, which I probably shouldn't be. It's probably a false confidence, but I'm always like, I'll sit up like 30 yards from that trail and shoot them when they come down the trail. Well, if they do something weird at that point in time, they're 45 yards away from you. Where if you're setting up for like a 12 or 13 yard shot, then if the deer does something weird, he's still like 25, 30 yards away. You know, so like in that instance, you set up for like a 3 yard shot, but it was on a trail that was like right in front of you. There's another trail, you know, further to the south. If you just set up for a closer shot to that trail, then this buck would have been well within your range, even out there further, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, for sure. I really wasn't setting up on the trails as much as just being able to see.
Yeah.
And I set up, that was my shot that I set up for, but being able to see and call bucks to me was my biggest thing. And it was kind of a dumb thing now looking back at it, but you know,
that gotta learn, man.
Yeah, no, that's the thing is we're learning. And you know, like you said though, the trail distance, that's something I had written down, man. Like whatever you're comfortable with, you need to like be able to, you need to have trails that, whatever trail you think the deer are coming down, they need to be within that distance, right?
Yeah.
So, like for me, it's really probably like 35 yards, depending on probably how big he is. I know it sounds terrible, but
well, if it's a big body, then you got more room to shoot. Right?
I mean, yeah, exactly.
And they ain't gonna move as fast.
And it's once in a lifetime thing, maybe sometimes, but I don't know. I'm probably wrong on that.
And you hungry?
We'll talk about that some other time. I am hungry, but I think. Within 5 yards of your max distance is a good thing to shoot for. But what else is there? Like when you're eliminating a tree, obviously the wind direction. We're testing thermals a lot with those milkweed, which are awesome. We love.
And
those.
I think you have to really consider, go back to that direction of travel stuff that we talked about earlier, and consider how the deer are going to use the trail that you're setting up on. We talked about earlier a quartering to shot that I was going to take on that buck. Well, he was 9 yards away, and with the setup I'm shooting, I'm going to blow through about near anything at that distance, in the whitetail world at least. Well, I probably still, and with the setup I'm shooting, wouldn't feel as comfortable about that if that was a 35-yard shot quartering to. First of all, your quartering to like vitals zone is a lot smaller, right? So I'm shooting for a much like smaller spot at 35 than I would be if it was a quartering away at 35. And here's another thing that you have to start being comfortable with when you start thinking about this quartering away versus quartering to and straight on or whatever kind of shot with your trail, is you have to be comfortable with letting a deer walk past you before you take the shot.
Kind of a nameless thing almost.
Kind of like a nameless thing, yeah. And they're kind of like a rattling a buck from 450 yards thing the last time,
right.
too.
Yeah.
When we didn't let that happen.
Yeah.
I tried to take the shot at 40 when he probably would have kept on walking and gave me a 22-yard shot quartering away. But I didn't do it. But like with nameless, like if you go back and watch that film, you see you looking like you're trying to struggle to pull a bow back, but that's not actually what's happening. You're just putting off and waiting on that deer to come and walk into 23 yards, right? When he was out there at 35, and you probably could have shot, but there probably is some more things that could go wrong, and you let him walk into 22 or 23, right, where it was completely open, quartering away, and smoked him.
Another thing to think about is that deer, the deer from the other night that came down the trail, quartering to at 8 yards or whatever, he would have walked to a broadside like 4 yard shot probably. But this is one thing you also have to think about is ground scent.
Yeah.
He picked up our ground scent.
And that must have been like this, just like one molecule, because like he just went and like turned real hard, and then he was like, "What just happened?" It's like he almost reacted to it and didn't think about it. It was very strange.
And then he's a young bug, but he worked off like. I mean, there's probably several shots that you had as he was working off, I would imagine. I mean, a bigger buck might not do that, obviously, but, like, got to be careful, and that's part of what you're talking about with access and approach and everything. Like, you got to be careful. Try to use if it's a evening hunt, try to use your eyes to look at trees rather than walk over to them if you can. And try to, at some point, like, we had to walk to some of these trees, but you want to, like, walk to as few trees in that area as possible.
I think that's a good point, because I think you need to, in like your spring and summer scouting, I know it's a little thicker then, but you need to get in the woods and understand how the woods work and how lanes work. That way, like, sometimes it's very hard to identify a shooting lane unless you can look straight down it. But if you get in the woods and you spend some time looking at areas that you have lanes, you'll be able to see those things from a distance as opposed to having to walk up to it and identify, like, okay, I have a shot right here. Like, I know we did that the other morning whenever we were trying to find that tree in the dark, right? Like, we're looking at stuff even with headlamps, and we're like, okay, I can tell, like, there's like a grassy patch over there to the right, so I know that if we go to that tree, we'll be able to shoot that direction at least 20 yards, right? And whenever you like have a decent understanding of how like trees and open areas work in the woods, you're going to have a much higher rate of success of not at least putting down too much ground scent and having to walk around and mess up all this stuff.
Man, I've noticed the ground scent thing a lot this year come into play. You know,
Yeah.
it's I think it's something that doesn't get talked about very much, but like on a hanging hunt is an issue, man, for sure. Like, I mean, if you got your stand set up, it's a perennial stand, and you got a easy access, good access to it, and everything. Like, it's not. You don't notice that stuff actually happening sometimes. But.
Well, having to lay down your pack to put the stands in the tree is a huge thing. And there's really, you can do everything you want to, ozone sprays, whatever, to your pack. But walking in, there's going to be some sweat and there's going to be some odor on that pack just from the walk in and, whatever. And besides that, just you spending time on the ground and breathing on the ground in that area, like, you're going to put some scent on the ground.
Yeah.
If you can walk up to a stand, go right up the stand, it's a much bigger deal. So something I've kind of started doing is being a little attentive to at least where I'm setting my pack on the ground and trying to, like, not situate it a couple times and move it to different spots. Like setting it right there, oftentimes like right on the base of the tree.
Yeah.
And that'd be the only place that I put the pack until we send it up, and I think that could make a difference. I'm not saying it does. It's those things like that are just so subjective because you never know what it would have done if you'd have done something different. But it's like that margin of error thing. If you can eliminate 1% of your margin of error, then it might be the 1% that matters.
Right. We've almost got to 100 encounters this year, probably. So we're
sooner or later, the 1% is going to matter.
The 1% is going to matter.
And that ground scent thing's funny too because it's not always a make or break deal. Like, how many deer have we had this year, like, catch some ground scent and, like, really try to give us the eyeball stare and then, like, finally just ease off. Yeah. Right? So it's like if you minimize it and they don't have as much to catch up on right there, it can save you. Even if you do get busted a little bit. Like that little buck did that. He did that thing you talked about where, like, he smelled something and he looked right up at me.
Yeah, I know. I was like,
how did you do that? I don't know, man. I don't know what it is.
It's
but, like,
weird.
then the does in Kansas, same thing. They were like at 5 yards and she was just staring me down up at that tree. And then finally they worked off too, you know.
Big Buck on the last day up there did that too, which you guys haven't seen that video yet, but the half rack, he did the same thing. And, like, as soon as he caught wind, he was like, looked right up at me. I was like, what in the world are you doing? How do you know it's coming from up?
Yeah.
So, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the ground scent's a big key, and I think just approaching trails and that kind of thing. Like, here's another thing. I've always wondered, like, it's so much easier to walk down a deer trail most of the time, but is that a bad thing?
Oh, I do my best not to.
Yeah.
Like,
that's kind of how I feel about it, too. I mean, like,
even if you got rubber boots on, like, you're still, like, there's some type of scent. When was it? Sometime recently, I remember a deer catching ground scent on something that we brushed up against. I think it might have been in Kansas. I can't remember for sure, but I remember that being something that happened. Like, a deer walked by and, like, sniffed something and didn't like it. And, like, it wasn't about your shoes or anything. It was about something brushing right up against your arm.
Yeah, I don't remember what
I just remember it happening. I don't remember what it was.
I was thinking it might have been the does that we saw in early November I don't know.
Possibly.
I don't know. But, yeah, it is a thing. And, like, I kind of wonder, I always, like, when I'm going across a trail, I almost, like, always try to, like, take a big step, you know? Like, even, like, extra, not just over the trail, but, like, over the stuff around the trail or whatever. I don't know if that – I'm the same way. Like, if you can eliminate – like your 1% here and there, and it adds up to a certain, amount, then that's a good thing. Another thing I do to help eliminate trees is I ask myself, is it a locust tree?
Dude, do you remember that one? It was in the dark.
Oh, no.
We were walking in the dark, and I shined my headlamp on it, and it had a thorn that was like 12 inches long. It was the tree of death, and I thought about hanging it, and I was like, nope, I ain't doing it.
I got a picture of you sitting there right beside one that afternoon. Big sucker, big one. It had these just groups of thorns growing all off the trunk, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think at one point you considered it, and I was like, "There's one. Look at this one over here."
In the daylight, especially if it's windy, like you can knock a lot of those off.
Yeah.
Like they're dry and dead,
yeah.
and you can deal with that amount of sound. And something I'm noticing lately is how much deer can't hear.
Yeah,
and that's never something you should take lightly,
right?
And never like bet on it. But like, dude, sticks and stuff break in the woods all the time.
That's kind of the thing. It's like if it's a natural sound.
Yeah, it's them clanks.
Well, even here's another thing is even the clanks. If it's one, they just forget about it quick. I think that they look up and look at it for however many minutes, and like obviously they're too far to see you most of the time, and then after 2 minutes they stop looking at it again. I mean, stuff like that happens. These deer are around farm equipment and that kind of thing, Yeah,
so. I don't know if maybe sharp sounds aren't harder to determine, like exactly where it's at.
I think so.
It's like those thuds, like grunts, and that are longer too. But like that sharp tink. Like, I don't think they know where that's coming from.
No, they didn't expect it.
How many times have you seen a deer like throw its head up and like try to listen again to hear where that's coming from?
Yeah. That's how I feel about it too. Like, you don't want to be loud, but like if you make sharp noises like that, sticks they break all the time, like you said. I don't, you don't want to just sit there and like crush down a whole briar thicket or nothing. But
you fell out of the tree in Kansas, and deer got up from 60 yards away. Dude,
it was like a slow fall too. It was like.
Yes, it wasn't quiet. I remember it happening. Man, we had a little bit of wind, but it wasn't crazy. And honestly, those deer were. I guess they were kind of upwind, but still, like at 60 yards with like a 15-mile-an-hour wind or less.
I don't think it was even 15.
Might not have been. I don't know.
They could have heard it for sure.
Yeah.
So, and another thing, this is just, this is Hunt's fresh on our mind, but there was a tree in there that afternoon that was a dead oak, like post oak, that had a bunch of leaves on it. Mm-hmm. And I think, obviously, especially early season, like one thing you want to, when you're assessing a tree and you're eliminating trees, is like how much can you see out of that tree as opposed to something that may be like really close, same kind of option or whatever, but a little more vision, We get swamp oaks and stuff that just will hold leaves till January just about, and
that actually pretty much cost me $1 in that last PLC that we released.
Yeah.
That I cry about every day.
Green leaves.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is like, and that's a great tree and it's good cover, but if you, I don't know, you want cover, but it's like at some point, how much cover, like if you have a better option, consider this option over here where all the leaves are yellow and half of them have fallen out as opposed to this swamp oak that's got full thing of green, so it may, and it's the same thing. It's like we talked about in the beginning, shoot holes and everything, figure out which one is the best option because there's almost always going to be something about a tree that's not ideal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get down to the nitty gritty.
Sure.
So you've got a couple trees.
Another thing real quick.
What?
Too big or too small?
Ooh.
We've had some bad too bigs for sure.
Yeah.
It takes a pretty small tree to be too small, I think. But when you're in a small tree, you have to be super still. So if the wind's not blowing, small trees are not ideal. If you got a tree that's too big, you can't get your sticks around it. But I did build some extra extenders, which I think could be helpful in some situations. But that particular instance, it was just too big.
Mondo,
it was just like 12 foot wide, whatever. But anyway,
that's where screw ins come to play. And when you're out of state and can use screw ins, it's really nice for stuff like that.
In states that don't let you do that, it's like you just want to beat somebody in the face. But I just wanted to run through that. That's another part of my elimination process.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. What makes a good tree?
There are several things.
Are there?
Starting with what we were just talking about, a medium-sized tree
Medium-sized tree.
If we're talking about great trees, a medium-sized
So,
tree.
say our listener is from like Northern California where there are sequoias and redwoods, or I think sequoias are a different place. Anyways, giant trees. What is a medium-sized tree?
At that point, it's 8 foot wide.
I know, right? Like for like deer hunting purposes, I'm gonna say like a tree that's in the like
you can almost hug it. You know?
Like
or
anything
you could hug it
from like 12 to 24 inches in diameter, right? Like really like your classic post oak, like mid-level growth, not quite mature tree kind of tree, right? And I think the hugging that's because I mean, what are you doing when you're literally a tree hugger when you're putting a stand up, right? So you're putting your hand, like if you can put your hand around the tree, grab the strap, and hook it in, it's so much quieter and so much easier than flinging the strap around the tree.
Yeah, and you mentioned that oak tree, and we talk about, like, in some situations how nice a softwood is, but a hardwood, man, for like I talked about with a smaller tree, if you're in a hardwood post oak, it's not going to shake nearly as much as like an ash tree, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in a swamp ash and, you know, the wind is blowing 6 miles an hour and this is like an 8-inch tree, you're gonna be the only tree shaking in the woods. You know what I mean? But in an oak, it's a little different.
If you want to feel like you're rock solid and can like do jumping jacks in the tree, hang in a board arc. Like,
there you go. Yeah.
You remember that big board arc we hung in on Texas Public? Like, you were solid as a rock up there. Like, nothing moved.
Oh, it was cool. Awesome. It was awesome. But, you know, like if you were going to, say you're in a state that allows you to do screw-ins or whatever, I would think that screwing into a boat arc or something like that would be
probably terrible.
Impossible.
Yeah. That's when the ash tree is nice. Or like a,
you
know, in cottonwoods, you got to be careful with that because their bark is so big. Like, it's so soft on like one of those big parts of bark that you can't literally put a screw in worth stepping on.
Yeah.
It's kind of
even putting your backpack on sometimes.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, which we have some backpack hangers that
we're going to show y'all about that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Anyway, that's my first one is a medium to large tree makes a great tree. What about you?
I like a tree that has some sort of cover, and cover can be described in many different ways. You can't have too much cover because then it gets really tough to hang. But it's honestly, nowadays, I would feel comfortable hanging on a telephone pole if I have back cover, like cover to back.
Yep, back
and I think that makes a big difference on cover. Like cover doesn't always mean like what's right in your face or what's in front of you, but it's oftentimes it's what's behind you. And I think we've talked about this before. We had a deer in Kansas that like kind of got weird and ended up not coming. Like he was headed to our grunt calls and then turned around and left. There's a couple hypotheses as to what happened. I think he probably saw a coyote, but he may have got to the point to where we no longer had cover to back. He might have got to the So like whenever he was out there at 200 yards, we had trees all behind us. But whenever he got up there to like 120 or whatever he was, he finally got to where there's two big blobs up in this tree, and he's like, "What's going on over there?" I don't know if that's what happened, but it's something to consider when you're talking about hanging in a tree, and that's oftentimes something that I've learned hunting with you is that hanging 8 foot up in a tree isn't the worst thing in the world. I like to be 33 feet up in a tree. You know how I am. Like I feel like I'm so comfortable up there. But when you're 8 foot up from the tree, it's really hard for a deer to skyline you or skylight you, I guess is what it is. And whenever you're 8 foot up, by the time they get to that angle of approach where you actually have sky behind you, they're very close. Yeah, the angle's so tight that they can't see you. You know, you're above where they can see.
Oh yeah, and that too. Yeah, because their vision, like Dr. Carl Miller talked about they
have a band of really clear stuff, and it's kind of like how our peripherals work on the side of our head. You know, and we kind of have it up and down too. It's just a lot less noticeable. Yeah, but on a deer,
their pupils, right? Yeah, what it's called. It's horizontally oblong, right? Yeah, so they see better along the horizon, yeah.
Which most prey species are going to be that way.
Yeah.
You think about like a cat, their pupils vertical, right? It's a predator-style pupil. I wonder if there's something to that where like we're omnivores, so we have a round pupil.
Maybe do bears have round?
I don't
raccoons?
Know. Raccoons do, I think.
There you go.
Yeah.
Omnivores.
How about that?
Hey, you just discovered something.
Coyotes have a round pupil too, which they're omnivorous as well. But anyways,
persimmon
I think
eaters.
That whole cover thing is a big deal for me.
Yeah. The backdrop was a thing I had listed. So, yeah me too.
Okay.
Me too.
Yeah. So what's your next one?
a great tree has a straight trunk for at least 3 feet where you can reach, at stand height. Whatever. If you don't have that, man, I've sat in some uncomfortable tree stands that didn't have that. If you and 3 feet, I mean, my stand's probably, the bracket is probably not 3 feet, but that gives you a good clearance. And you obviously, above that mark, you got to not have a limb sticking out on your side as well, so that your head isn't smoking it. But
yeah,
that's another thing a great tree has.
That's good. So I think a great tree kind of goes along with what you said, Lego, with the size of the tree, but a great tree just doesn't wiggle very much. And some trees, even no matter how big or small they're going to be, are going to wiggle. And along with that, you might be in a giant tree, but you're going to have a limb that's constantly a battle for you. And if you try to turn to shoot, or you're adjusting a camera arm, or you're turning and you're bumping into this limb all the time, there's going to be one specific spot on that tree that's wiggling around a lot.
And while we're talking about limbs, I think a great tree has a few extra limbs that you can put gear and jackets and stuff on while you're setting up. Because, man, my jacket's right on the outside. Yours do too. On my backpack, on the outside going in. So, the first thing I have to do is unbungee them and put them somewhere. And, they can go on my stand seat, but there has been times when they got real close to falling off. And there's nothing better than, a good, 3 or 4 inch limb, diameter that you can just throw that jacket over and crush it down into the V of the tree, and it'll never come out.
Yeah.
And so, having that is a good deal, but you got to be careful with a great tree. Obviously, we're talking about a great tree. Ideal scenario here. You don't have too many limbs that impede your draw and all these different things, but you have enough that you can store gear and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good one.
Got anything else?
I think a great tree is optimal for a quiet setup, and this happens a lot of different directions, a lot of different ways. We hung in a tree in Kansas that was not that. Actually was a dead tree, which I wouldn't advise hanging in ever, but sometimes it's the only tree to hang in, and it's pretty stout.
I don't think I buckled in that day. We were pretty low off the ground.
You were
maybe I did.
I think you did, but you considered not, if the tree did fall.
I wanted to test the tree first. Actually, when you were climbing up is when I took my...
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
my tether off or whatever.
Well, that tree had dead bark all around it. And you've told the story about that piece of dead bark that dumped a bunch of bud duke in my
don't do that.
in my backpack. Okay, but that bark made it super loud and super squeaky to walk up and down those steps because there's an extra surface of friction between the bark and the wood of the tree, and it made it really loud. And then you can take other examples where you talked about earlier, that I think it might have been a post oak or a black oak or something that still was holding on to a bunch of leaves that were dead. And that would be a rattle shaker up there trying to hang in that tree with all those limbs. And then other situations where you've got trees that have vines and stuff on them. It's really hard to climb up and not get all your junk caught on those vines and make a bunch of racket. So trees that are optimal for being quiet when you're hanging, especially hanging hunts, because you're expecting, usually when you hang and hunt, you're figuring there's deer within 200 yards of you. You're hoping that there is, right?
Right.
So you have to make sure that you're doing it quietly. And you got enough stuff to worry about with clanking buckles and putting stands up and all that kind of stuff to not have to worry about the tree making noise, too.
Right. Yeah. A great tree sometimes may have cedars around it. I love, my ideal scenario... So when we first started hunting in Kansas, we hunted this one spot, and you go across some high country stuff, and I can remember it was mostly I hunted it in the afternoons, but sometimes in the mornings. But you go across and you feel just naked out there, but it's kind of high, and everything around you that the deer are living in is lower. I felt like, but so you're going across here, and right at the end of this little field in the corner, right next to the creek, you drop down into the creek bottom essentially, and the stand is right there, and it's on a big cottonwood, and around the cottonwood are several big cedars. And I walked in and climbed up into my stand, which sits about 3 feet over the top of those big cedars, and got set up with deer 20 yards from me in there. I mean, That's pretty awesome.
It's pretty sneaky.
And so, and another thing is like this is kind of a little bit off subject, but I've killed a lot of deer out of tripods that we set up. Like it's basically like hanging hunt style. We would go in and set up a tripod in the middle of the day. I'd go get a shower, get scent free or whatever, come back out and set up in this tripod that is literally set into like 2 or 3 cedars in the middle, and I have like a shooting lane, and kill a deer that afternoon. I've done that a few times. I think that's like a foolproof thing to do. It's like I don't know if you'd call it, it's obviously not a hanging hunt because you're not hanging it, but whatever you do to a tripod, you stand and hunt or whatever. I mean, but it's cool. I love cedars, man. If you can get cedars around you, obviously you want them to be on kind of on the downwind side or give you some pretty good shooting lanes, but man, they're foolproof.
Yeah. Well, I think that pretty much covers what I look for in a great tree.
I have one more.
Do you?
Yeah. So a great tree, and this is not 100% of the time, but a great tree can be a landmark tree, i.e. nameless.
Ooh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know Cody Beaver, who was on this podcast at one point talking about unconventional ways of killing deer. He has killed deer out of landmark trees that were in the middle of like wheat fields, and deer just see that on the horizon or whatever. Somehow, you guys know if you listen, or if you hunt quite a bit, like there's a tree out in the middle that those deer always seem to get up under and hang out in. It's the one piece of cover out in the middle of that field. And he killed a deer out in a tree like that. He said same situation, like it's so tiny, he just shaking the tree and didn't know like if it was going to even hold him when he got up in it at some point, but like made it work, low off the ground, not too high, and with nameless it was kind of the same deal. We were kind of in a landmark tree that I felt like it was like there's no real, like we're not along the direct path of bed to feed for these deer in that situation, but we gave it a shot, and on a good wind, I mean, he came straight to the landmark there.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. If you see that could possibly be a great tree. Anyway, that wraps it up for me.
What about? I've got something. Since you went a little cray.
All right.
A great tree can be a food source.
Ooh.
That's something that
last December we saw that over at Babylon, right?
We did, man. We hang in what some of you might know as a swamp oak or a water oak. There's some willow oaks around too. These are all trees that hold their leaves late in the season, really never lose their leaves completely. And they also put off acorns that are high in tannins, okay? So they're not the first ones to be eaten. They also, since they are high in tannins, I believe, preserve a lot better than the other acorns, okay? So those acorns are going to actually be still on the ground, usually in large quantities on those trees as well, later into the season. So as it pushes on, as the other acorns start to rot, which we're really going to probably run into
how much rain are we going to get?
I don't know,
this year?
and it's like across pretty much the South right now.
Really?
Everybody's getting rain. And with these cold temps, you got some rain, you got some frost coming in, like all those acorns are going to start rotting, especially the ones that are in the white oak varieties. And these other ones that are high in tannins could see deer shift to them. And I think that sitting in a food source tree, especially late season like that, even early season, if you're talking about white oak fall and stuff, is not a bad idea.
Yeah. December 2nd, 2015, that was the day I shot Jack. I believe it was the 2nd. Anyway, it was early December, and he was eating bodark leaves off the ground that had fallen, whatever, a couple weeks before or whatever, so I think from my research, bodarks are pretty preferential for a tree, like a leaf, off of a tree. And even these dead ones he was eating, you can see it on the film. He was just eating them right there, like 15 yards. And I guess that's kind of one of those instances, like, well, here we are in, Midwest, not a whole lot of crops around. What are these deer going to eat? They're going to eat a food source tree, and I was happened to be sitting in a row of bodarks in a hedgerow, so it's a good point, man. I guess we've kind of exhausted our tree talk for the day.
We have. If you have other points that we didn't think about, let us know, because
Sure, yeah.
I'm always trying to come up with new creative reasons to hang in one tree versus another.
Yeah.
I need you to help me kill a deer is what I'm trying to tell you.
There you go. That's right. And if nothing else, I need to hang some ornaments in some trees probably, because I think my kids have been knocking a few off.
We haven't even put our Christmas tree up. Actually, the bottom section is up, so we have a topped out tree in our living room for some reason. I don't know why. I think my wife put it out there and did that so that I would finish it, and she never asked me to. Yeah. She just thought, oh, maybe he'll do that. Nah.
Yeah. My wife put ours up, which is all of 4 feet tall. I'm not trying to say anything bad, but we don't have a whole lot of space in here right now. Yeah. And she's kind of gotten the point, I guess, that I would like to put up a Christmas tree. I like doing stuff like that, but I just don't have the time right now.
Yeah, I hear you.
So she's a champ, though. She did it. So anyway, there are a couple of Texas PLCs that have released. You guys can check out. One of them is very exciting. That KC had some pretty good encounters on a good day. Oh my gosh, dude, we would have killed that buck if Journey hadn't have gotten sick that night.
Tyler's daughter threw up, and you were up all night long.
Oh, all night. And I texted him probably before his alarm went off. It was I think I texted you 3, and I was because I knew you'd be getting up pretty soon. I was all right, I'm going to text him, let him know I just can't make it because we don't have a sitter, I got to be here. And so, and that morning, he happened to be able to shoot a deer that he was instead having to get the camera on. So if that had been me, cameraing would have been done.
Almost got it done anyways.
I know.
So close.
Yeah, he was right there. So anyway, that's one of our videos that's online. I've been posting a bunch lately. The Rut-Cation series, we'll hit that again. If you haven't seen that, that was pretty fun time. Once I get through a couple of these Texas PLCs, we are going to move back into the Kansas thing because we went pretty recently, and we might go recently. We might go soon again. So I don't know what the plan is from this point on. We're kind of trying to get through one of my real good friends' weddings. So once we get through that this weekend, it's going to open up until Christmas time. I'm just going to hunt every day if I can.
Every day.
So, the Onyx Premium membership giveaway.
Guess what? All right. For those of you who follow us on Instagram, all right.
Did you say Instagram? I hope you did.
Yeah.
I like it. Instagram?
Inster. Okay, I don't know. So it gets close to lunch. I got a lot of saliva right now.
Oh, dude, me too. I'm feeling the same way. I can't talk right now.
All right,
to eat.
So we did not have anyone claim from the last time. Can you imagine that?
I can't. I actually did not expect that at all.
I didn't either.
But I think that I'm guessing that our Instagram followers follow us for the cool picture content.
Yeah,
and
maybe
not for the
not
podcast.
Podcasters. So maybe some of y'all podcast listeners need to overlap a little bit more.
Yeah.
Also, last time we just did call signs or ats or whatever, and we didn't do the actual names of people.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't recognize their at. So we're going to do both today.
That's your problem. When you ain't Instagramming too much, you don't know what your ad is.
I know it. All right, so there are 4 winners. We have picked new winners. If you listen to the old podcast and you're a winner and it is past December 7th, right? Mm-hmm. Sorry, you missed your chance. Next time, brother. Okay. Bell Jonah Photo, who is Jonah Bell. You have won a Premium Onyx membership for a single state.
Way to go, Jonah.
Way to go, Jonah. Aaron Hirsch, which is A Hirsch 56. You have won an Onyx membership.
Way to go, Aaron.
Kyle 2SB. Kyle Lowry. You have won a Onyx membership.
Way to go, Kiwau.
BW Hunter for Life, which is Bow Hunter for Life. Josh Garrison, you have won an Onyx membership.
All right,
so,
Josh.
Dudes, send us an email, send us a message on social media, go to the website, whatever. Get in contact with us so we can get this to you. I'd really like to send this out before, Christmas time. Because I'm going to be real busy and the post office is busy and all that stuff. So, holler at us. Let us know that you won. Or we let you know that you won. Let us know that you won.
That's right.
And we will get you your Onyx membership.
Yep. Congrats to you guys. I hope you can claim that because Onyx is something we use every day.
Yeah. If you go back to how we started this, which was the select the area, it pretty much is Onyx, right? There.
Yeah. So anyway, big part of what we do. Anything else cool going to happen soon?
we're just going to do a bunch more hunting.
I'm ready for it, man.
The rain's going to stop sometime soon, so that's good.
I hope, dude. I'm cooking a pheasant soon.
Oh,
I think.
How about that?
Yeah. Probably going to take it and might try to cook it today in the oven.
Tasty. With shallots?
I don't know about all that. Probably just do a rub and let it rock and roll that way. I was thinking about doing it in the crock pot with like a mushroom, cream sauce or whatever, but my local barbecue expert said that in the crock pot it would lose all its juices, so I need to do it low heat in the oven or on a barbecue or grill. So
Okay.
I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, but he cooks the best brisket I've ever eaten, so I can't hardly deny that
Is
he
it going
knows
to be a
more
pheasant
than I
brisket?
do. It's not a pheasant brisket. He cooks a lot of chickens though, and they're similar.
Good.
More fatty probably, but anyway, yeah, that's all I know, man. So I guess don't lose hope. You can still pick the right tree in the late season as well.
Right.
So get out there and get involved, and make sure you're hunting, because if you're not, man, you're missing like a big chunk of most seasons, right?
Yeah,
like
just
most of the states stay open till January.
Yeah, I don't understand these folks that are like, well, the rut's over.
Yeah.
I guess, I can't wait till 2019.
Yeah.
That ain't me, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to hunt till the very last day if I get a chance.
Yeah. Me too, man. Well, I guess I would go out of here singing "Oh Christmas Tree," but I think you got enough of that.
I think you might have lost every part of that song too. You're like, I'm going to start making up words now.
Hey, that's what we do.
That's right.
Remember the album we're coming out with?
Yeah.
It's coming out soon. All right, man. God bless you guys, and remember, this is your element.
Living it.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.